Hey, Presales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I am going to be joined by Susan St. Ledger, President of Worldwide Field Operations at Okta. The topic of today's episode is unlocking a high-growth mindset. I am honored and privileged to have Susan here today, and her name is no stranger to the Presales Collective, as she has been mentioned so many times as a role model for what is achievable in presales and life after presales. In today's episode, we're going to discuss Susan's career journey and talk about unlocking a high growth mindset and what that actually means. And so Susan's going to be providing us some real tactical examples to what that means, and also put an emphasis on learning and growing and what happens when we're outside of our comfort zone. We're going to talk about women and underrepresented minorities within presales and what we need to do to bring more women and more underrepresented minorities to the amazing profession of presales. I had so much fun recording today's episode. It's amazing that Susan was able to share her time with us today and give back to the presales community. So enjoy today's episode. Susan, welcome to the Presales Podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, James. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. I feel like I'm a little bit starstruck today having you on the podcast. I've seen and heard your name throughout the presales community, and now you're here joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor. You know that SEs are the most important people in the world. So
we are getting started by talking about SEs being so important. And I want to ask you about that. But Susan, a little bit of a personal thing first is I understand that you are a big fan of John Wooden and have studied John Wooden more than any other coach and always refer back to his quotes and pyramid of success. And so I'm just curious on how John Wooden has impacted your leadership style.
As I've talked about many times, I've read so many things from John Wooden, so many of the books. His quotes are epic. So many of his quotes are, and obviously he's a leader first and foremost. What I love about him is that when he invested in his teams, yes, he had, the greatest winning streak ever, but when he invested in his teams, he was invested in the whole person, right? So if you listen to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or any of the other players, they talk about the impact he had on them as a person. And that's a big part of what I try and think about from my leadership style is making sure you think about the whole person, not just the person who's contributing to your business, but really understanding the human being and treating people as human beings and making sure you're invested in them as much as possible throughout their career and throughout their life, not just when they're working for you.
That's amazing. And I love that you said that, because even for those who aren't familiar with his pyramid of success, all of his building blocks really start with core values. And the top block is competitive greatness, which is the output on the basketball court. He just did so much more for these people. And I think that's what always resonated with me. So I love to hear that you've incorporated some learnings from him within your leadership style.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And his learning mentality is the other thing. I always talk about the fact that my mom and my dad had such a great influence on me. And my dad, who's a teacher, taught me to be a student for life and always be learning. And my mom taught me to be a student of life, which is not all the lessons come out of a book. You got to learn from your experiences too. And he has so many great quotes about learning. And the one that I love the most is learn as if you're going to live forever and live as if you're going to die tomorrow.
That's a powerful quote. I love that. Mine's what you've learned after you know it all, that counts. I love the John Wooden quotes. It's actually a great segue into today's topic, Susan. We're going to be talking about unlocking a high growth mindset. Again, your name has come up around our community so many times as somebody who started in pre-sales and has done so much with their career can show that the sky is the limit for pre-sales professionals. So I'd love if you could break down your pre-sales journey and talk to us about your experience.
Sure, I'd be happy to, but I'm going to make you jealous first on the John Wooden thing. I actually got to meet him. I actually got to brief him. He was a speaker for us at an event when I was at Sun Microsystems, and I got to be the person to brief him.
That's amazing.
He was awesome. So journey in pre-sales, I actually started college as a biology major because when you grow up in small town America, especially back when I grew up, when I finished high school in the early 80s, people tell you if you're good at math and science, you should be a doctor. And so there was no talk of computer science or engineering. And so then I got to college. And after my first year, I took a computer science class and switched my major to computer science. So it was kind of a lucky guess. Silicon Valley was not Silicon Valley back then. It was a tiny little thing that nobody knew about. I certainly didn't know about and certainly never envisioned this type of career. But really what happened was NSA, National Security Agency, recruited deeply at our school, and they had some incredibly interesting jobs. So I spent my first 6.5 years as a software engineer at the National Security Agency doing hardcore computer science programming. That was a lot of fun. Obviously, very purpose-driven, very passionate about the mission of NSA and what they do. I was there for about 6.5 years and got recruited by Sun Microsystems. Sun was pretty much a shrine to NSA. And so I was deeply knowledgeable on Sun OS, eventually became Solaris, but Sun OS at the time. And I got recruited to come over and be we now call them sales engineers. We called them systems engineers back then, pre-sales systems engineers. And yeah, I came in super low on the totem pole because I was coming out of the government. So kind of went by salary, right? So I came in as an SE2 on a scale of 1 through 6 and just kind of worked my way up. After a couple of years, I had an SE director come to me and say, hey, this SE management job is open. Why aren't you applying for it? You're the perfect person. And I said, no. I said, our SE managers, they lose their technical edge. They manage the loaner pool. Like, it's not an interesting job to me. I don't think they're very valuable. And he's like, oh, well, if you were in that job, what would you do? And I was like, I would do this and I would do this, and I would do this. And I named all these different things that I would do that were much more engaged with the true selling aspect and building a true sales-minded SE team. And he's like, well, then take that effing job and do that. And that was the beginning of my management career.
That's so great. One, just hearing your story of making the jump from software engineering into systems engineering, sales engineering, but also having a manager who unlocks the potential in you, that pushes you to say, how are you going to do things differently? And then saying, okay, now go and do it. And looks like the rest is history.
Exactly.
So not only did you have a great experience at Sun Microsystems, you're at Buddy Media, Salesforce, Splunk, but now you're at Okta. Why did you choose to go to Okta?
James, over and over again, whenever I decide to make a pivot, there's really two things I look for. It's all about the market opportunity and the people. You want to make sure that you go after a market opportunity that's massive, because when there's a market opportunity that's massive and you pick the right company, the right tech, you can talk about the high growth mindset, the opportunity for high growth is there. If you pick a small market opportunity, it doesn't matter. The high growth, you're never going to get to that long, sustained high growth. So it's about getting to a high growth market opportunity. And number two is you want to work with people, of course, that you like, but also people that you can learn from. And that's what I saw at Okta on both sides of the equation.
And well, you talked about the people. One of the things that I've heard you say is who you learn from matters. And I heard you say a quote once that you thought you knew how to learn until Mark Benioff really taught you how to learn. Personally, I'm a very big Mark Benioff fan. He was one of the reasons why I went to go work at Salesforce. And during the pandemic, I got to see Mark's leadership style firsthand, which was better than any MBA that I could have ever expected. Mark teaching you how to learn, what does that actually mean? And how did he impact you?
It's a little bit of a nuance. What I say is that he took my mindset to a whole other level. And so what I mean by that is, having experienced Mark firsthand, that Mark thinks big. And so, he used to always tell us, and it's a Bill Gates quote that says, you always overestimate what you can do in 1 year and you underestimate what you can do in 10. But what Mark always did was kind of like a great coach. They always push you harder and make you think bigger and move the bar on you. What I always say is not only did he make me think bigger and really understand, you look at the success at Salesforce, and I was fortunate enough to be there when it was a little over 100 million, all the way to 8.5 billion. And nobody ever thought that company would do that. It's things like the average selling price when I got there was $67K. 8 years later, the strategic team that I was running did an $80 million deal in December and then a $123 million deal in January. That's an 8-year period. And so when I talk about he changed my mindset, made me think bigger, like he always made us believe those things were possible. And he just kept making you think bigger and bigger, and nothing was ever good enough. It was keep moving that bar. But I think the other thing he did was he made me understand that the way I interpret it is your belief system comes from your experiences. And so he had it in his belief system based upon his Oracle experience, how big Salesforce could be and what it could look like. And now it's part of my experience and my belief system, right? And now I can bring other people along based upon my belief system because they might not have it yet.
That's unbelievable. And I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. You're right. There is that good coach who always kind of pushes you to maximize your potential, because sometimes other people see something in you that you might not necessarily see in yourself. And thinking about it from Mark's perspective or a macro level at the company perspective, I love the quote that you overestimate what you do in 1 year and underestimate what 10. That is so well said. It's very great to see.
It's very true. And one piece of advice I'll give people is if you're working for somebody who doesn't do that for you, find somebody else to work for, because you don't want the manager who just tells you you're perfect all the time. That manager is doing you a disservice, because even if you're the best at what you do, there's always room to improve. And if you really want to be excellent, that's the mindset you have to have, which is that continuous improvement mindset.
Speaking of such, I've heard you talk about high growth mindset and this idea of disrupting yourself when you're on top. I think that really resonates with me and what you just kind of mentioned about continuous improvement. So what does that actually mean? And how do you apply that to your experience in your career?
So high growth mindset for me is really three things. It's always be learning. That's number one. Number two is focus on continuous improvement. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is hindsight's 2020, right? So a great example in sales is, let's say we crush the quarter, you get to the end of the quarter, absolutely you want to celebrate. You want to celebrate, you hit the numbers, it's great, it's hard work, and celebrate. But the very next week, what we do as a management team is we focus on what it is we could have done better. Use hindsight to say, okay, what could we have done better? And if you could get that motion going, that continuous improvement, and always using hindsight, it can be incredibly powerful and just make you incrementally better over and over and over again. And then the third one is you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that is a sign of growth. If you're in a job where you're comfortable every day, you're probably not growing a whole lot. So be comfortable being uncomfortable is something I think that is hard for a lot of people, but it's really, really necessary in a high growth environment.
Susan, this is actually one of the quotes that I've used throughout my career, is becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think just from personal and professional experiences, moving a lot in my life, even before I was in high school and then throughout my professional career, it's something I've just really become accustomed to and almost get antsy when I'm in this situation. But I think those kind of experiences have molded me to who I am. Why do you think it's so hard for people to really become comfortable with the uncomfortable and push ourselves beyond a boundary? Because I think sometimes we like when things are going well and we're doing a good job, and we don't necessarily want to stretch ourselves and add added stress to our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most people, certainty feels good, routine or certainty, comfort. But again, you have to recognize the fact that growth comes out of discomfort. And so if growth isn't your goal, then it's probably okay. Let me also say that there are also probably times in your life where maybe you do need a little more certainty, and it's okay. Maybe you're a new mom or a new dad. Maybe there's something going on personally in your life where you're a caregiver for somebody, or there may be times where it is the right thing to do. And so I'm not saying that there aren't times where that makes sense.
That's a very good point. I think the last 18 months have taught us that sometimes there are circumstances that we can't control that may have a factor on if our risk-taking abilities are much higher or lower.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I want to shift to, Susan, and I know that you're very passionate about women in tech, women in sales engineering, and bringing diversity to pre-sales and tech generally. One of the things that you did at Splunk is you put a major focus on bringing female talent into your business. At your time when you were there at Splunk, Fortune listed Splunk as one of the best places to work for women. And that was revealed by metrics. That's what I heard that you've said before, is what you measure is what you improve. Can you expand on systematically how you've made this part of your DNA?
It really is about putting a focus on it and understanding that it's never going to be easy. And so it's about casting a wider net. First of all, you start with the measurement. What we did, it wasn't just me, it was as a collective executive staff. We all agreed to publish our numbers. We knew we weren't in a great place from a gender diversity perspective. So we started with gender diversity. And then the next year we moved to underrepresented minorities as well. And we included both. But we published the numbers and held ourselves accountable to saying we're going to move the needle. And when you're a large company already, it's pretty material to move the needle, set targets of 2% at a time. And so we were able to do that, and definitely proud of the work that we did there. That said, well, let me take a step back. So I think measuring is important. The other thing I will say is there's always this debate of, is it a pipeline problem or isn't it? It is a pipeline problem, because 100%, if you don't do anything special, the majority of the pipe that shows up is going to be white male in tech. People get offended when you say it's a pipeline problem. That doesn't mean that it's not a solvable pipeline problem. You just have to cast a wider net. You have to go with intent. You have to make sure that for every rec that you open, make sure that you insist that there be diversity candidates on the slate. And so in the end, it doesn't mean you choose the person because they're diversity. But if you're not making sure that for every position that you open, that you have diversity candidates included, you're never going to get there. That said, I believe we've got to go fix the pipeline problem. And you fix that by investing in things in grade school, middle school. Even when we were creating such a special environment at Splunk, it was very clear to me all we were doing was stealing from other people's diversity capabilities or diversity pools, right? What we really need to do collectively, and what I hope to spend a lot more time on, is really helping fix the earlier in life problem of how do we get women and underrepresented minorities exposed to technology sooner. Because like with anything, right? I learned how to play basketball and baseball and golf when I was young. I didn't learn how to ski until I was in my 20s. Guess what? I suck at skiing. I'm a timid skier, right? What you learn as a child is so much easier. And so we need to really get people more exposed to it.
I love that you talked about the pipeline problem. It's so true. And you're right. It is 100% a pipeline problem. And it starts very, very early. And I think a lot of people fail to recognize that. Stephanie Kinzer from Salesforce was actually on the podcast recently. And what she talked about was that she's actually volunteering with the Girl Scouts of America to bring awareness to technology and roles that exist. And even with Presales Collective, we've created the Presales Academy to create more awareness to people who are not even aware of this amazing role in this amazing profession called presales. But it does start so much earlier. And I think David Malouf from Salesforce mentioned this at a Presales Leadership Collective event, is that a lot of times we're fishing from the same ponds. When we have a role that opens, we go to the same ponds and grab the same people and expedite that hiring process. But you're right, we need to start looking into different ponds and fishing in the ocean, really, and taking a bigger risk on talent that might not fit our usual profile to start bringing more diversity into this profession. And I think pre-sales is the perfect role and the perfect opportunity to continue to bring and give opportunities to people. Because someone like myself, I am a white male, but I worked in hospitality and I went to a hospitality technology company. So I had immediate subject matter expertise. And I believe that there are millions of those stories out there. We just need to bring awareness and help find those people.
Completely agree. And the other thing is with internships, and especially now that we have this ability to do remote work, I think it's our greatest opportunity ever to go to different populations to find the underrepresented minorities and get more gender equality. I think it's a real opportunity because we've proven remote can work. And so let's expand the internship programs. Let's expand the college recruiting and getting people in and actually investing in them and training them. I think it's very doable.
That is a great point. I actually worked with an internship program at Dell over the summer. It was the most diverse group of sales engineers I've ever met in my entire life. And they were from all over the US. And it was actually really amazing to see that. And I think that really resonates with me that these internship programs and these remote really do minimize some of the barriers that have existed in the years prior. Susan, I am curious, as we continue to talk about pre-sales diversity, Presales Collective's releasing a State of Diversity in Presales report in the fourth quarter of 2021. And our numbers and research are showing that in North America, only 16% of the profession is female. And in EMEA, that number is at 18%. You did give us some ideas, but I am curious, is there anything specific that you think we should be doing to attract more women into this profession?
As you said, it's an awareness problem, James. So I think figuring out how to do a better job on the awareness, just go back to going to the colleges and making people aware that it is an awesome career with great opportunity is really the biggest thing. And then I think we also have to be broader minded. Somebody doesn't have to be an engineering or computer science major to teach them how to be a pre-sales engineer. And I think that's a bit of a bottleneck as well.
That's a good point. And, I think one of the topics that we've talked about with Presales Collective is that this pre-sales role is evolving. While I do think that it does have some similarities to 10, 15 years ago, I think buying is changing, technology is changing, sales is changing. Do you have any perspective on how the role is shifting and the potential importance of this role, not just now, but in the future?
Well, I've always seen it as important. I guess it's probably a little bit of a bias since I started so early in my career there. But no, I think certainly the technology landscape is more competitive than ever. No matter what you're selling, there's at least 2 or 3 hardcore competitors out there. And I do think that the SE capability is really a huge differentiator within a company. I know that any company I've ever been at, they know how much they appreciate it. They know how important they are, but it's not that way everywhere. And so the biggest thing I would say to the SEs that are out there, if you're not being included in the sales strategy, if you're not being asked to participate, if you're only being asked to show up and do demos or show up when there's a tech presentation, but you're not actually part of the account strategy, there's probably a better place out there for you, because that's the way that you'll really grow and become the best SE that you can be, or have opportunities to cross over into sales or marketing or whatever it is. I think the other thing I would say is I talked about the continuous improvement and the importance of that. I think SEs can play a great role in that with their sales leaders. And this is something that our sales teams, this is what I used to do, which is we'd come out of a sales meeting, I'd come out with a sales rep, and generally you're paired with the same one or two sales reps, and we would debrief with each other on how did it go? What could we have done better? Is there something we should have done differently on the agenda? Is there somebody we should have had at the meeting we didn't have? Is there something I said or you said that maybe we could have said differently? If you get in that motion, you become just invaluable to one another, and you become like such a great sales team to just commit to each other. You're going to debrief after every meeting and every interaction with customers and talk about how it went and what it could have done better.
I love those tactical examples, because there's so many conversations that we continue to have around this community around making sure that pre-sales does have a voice at the strategic table. One of the things that we say is that this role is moving from a sales support role to a co-pilot role. When I say moving, I think I'm talking macro, but like you said, some of the best organizations have already been operating this model for quite some time. And sometimes change has to come from the bottom. Sometimes it comes from the top. And one of the big things that we continue to talk about is the future of the pre-sales org. What does the future of pre-sales actually look like? You just gave us some very specific examples of how that happens. There's a lot of leaders that are listening to this podcast that really don't know where to start. Maybe they're struggling with their CRO, or they're struggling with their CEO, or they're struggling with their CFO in terms of justifying headcount. So how should a leader who might be struggling to really get that strategic seat at the table within a company go about building that place that team is seen like a true co-pilot?
If it's a top-down problem, it could be harder to fix. But what I would say is somewhere near the senior leadership team, there has to be somebody who gets it. So find the one person who gets it and talk about how the two of you can partner together to demonstrate how much stronger the organization would be if the SE organization had a seat at the table. But it really is an important thing. And there are sales leaders still out there that have never had that mindset and probably won't get there. There's only so much effort you can put into like trying to push a rope uphill, as they say. And so I think it's important when you're looking at your job, or if you're interviewing for a new job or selecting the next move in your career, make sure you have that as part of your criteria. Does the SE organization have a seat at the table? And I'll give you an example. I have a chief revenue officer who reports to me. So our SE leader reports to the chief revenue officer, which makes sense. However, every staff meeting every week, he sits on my staff. Yes, he reports to the CRO, but he sits on my staff as well, because he represents a function that is so vital to me that I cannot have it represented on my weekly staff. I do think it speaks volumes to say, do they have a seat at the table? And you have to look for it.
I really appreciate that you're really leading from the front in that example. And so maybe a tactical question, if you don't mind me asking, how do you ensure that your head of pre-sales and your CRO are super aligned in terms of how they go to market and how they strategize together, yet be different enough that they can come to you on different sides of the spectrum and figure out what's best for the customer and what's best for the organization?
Literally, it's a matter of making sure that when you're building your team that you interview for that. So in this case, I inherited an SE leader, Doug Ito, who is world-class. Super, super blessed to inherit Doug Ito at Okta. He's been there, 11 years maybe. He's been there a long time. And I hired a CRO, Steve Rowland. And of course, Doug was part of that process. Steve was somebody I knew from my past, but Doug had a huge say. Like if Doug didn't feel like that was somebody he was going to be able to work with, that would have mattered to me. And so I really think when you're building the team, you have to make sure that they both see in each other what they need to see in each other.
That's fantastic. And I really appreciate you giving us that tactical example within your organization. Susan, this has been amazing. I'm so thankful for your time and could probably ask you questions all day long. But we're coming up to the end. And I think there's one question that I really want to ask you for our audience is an advice question. You've given us a ton of advice throughout the episode, but especially to those female leaders or underrepresented minorities who may be the only female or underrepresented minority on their team, and they walk into a room full of men 95% of the time. What advice do you have for them?
The biggest thing that I would say is probably, it's the same answer I would give to knowing what I know now, what would I have done differently earlier in my career? And that is, you need to be your own best advocate, because there's something inherent more so in women and in underrepresented minorities that we blur the lines when it comes to being humble. And so we often deflect praise, and we believe that if we just do our best work, the rest will happen. And the truth of the matter is, regardless, you need to do your best work, absolutely. But you also need to be your own best advocate. And I see more often than not, so many, especially women, when they're publicly praised for doing great work, the first thing they say is, oh, no, it wasn't me, it was my team. And I'm just going to say there's a little nuance to, A, don't do that, because there are younger women watching you and they're going to continue to perpetuate that problem. And then the second thing I will tell you is there's just a slight nuance. You can still be humble. Say, thank you very much. I'm really proud of the work that my team and I did. Let's not continue to teach women to deflect praise, and be your own best advocate, because yes, your work speaks for itself at times, but there are other times that it needs your advocacy.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Susan. It's been an honor and privilege again to have you on the PreSales podcast today. Thanks for all that you've done for the pre-sales community. Thanks for all that you continue to do for women in tech. And thanks for just continuing to be an ally and supporter of what we're doing over here at the PreSales Collective. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, James. It was a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I'll see you next time. All right, PreSales Collective, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, we're honored and privileged to have Susan here with us today. A big thank you to Peter Polizzi over at Splunk, who made the introduction for us and asked Susan to be on our podcast. I think for me, this is a bit of a moment. We started this podcast a little over a year ago, and here we are now averaging over 6,000 listens per month. And we have current and former pre-sales professionals from all over the globe leaning in, talking about this amazing profession. I'm honored to host this podcast, and I'm so thankful to you for listening and to our guests for joining me to talk about the wonderful world of pre-sales. I love that Susan starts the episode off by saying SEs are the most important people in the world. And I really enjoyed hearing that she's a John Wooden fan. For those who aren't aware of John Wooden was a very successful collegiate basketball coach at the University of California, Los Angeles for many years in the 70s. But what he was so known for was bringing the best out of his players and focusing on them as humans versus their actual output on the basketball court. Not only was he a great coach, but he was a better person and a better leader. As we talk about leaders, one of the things that came up routinely from Susan was being around people who make you learn. And she gave great examples of Mark Benioff, pushing her to learn and think bigger. I love the quote that she talked about innovation in 1 year or 10 years' time. What she mentioned there was our belief system is really based upon our experiences. And as that kind of shifts to this concept of unlocking a high growth mindset, Susan gave us very tactical examples of always be learning and continuous improvement and getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. One of my favorite phrases from my own experiences in life. Why that's so important is we really do stretch ourselves when we're doing things we don't normally do. And what Susan said that resonated with me so much was the idea that growth comes from that discomfort. And if you're working for a leader, or maybe you are that leader who's always telling your employees, good job, good job, good job, that's great. But where are you giving them opportunities to grow? Where are you telling them that they have some opportunities to improve? Because I'm a firm believer that no matter how long we've been doing pre-sales, how long we've been doing anything, the world is evolving around us, which means that there's always opportunity for us to get better. Now, one thing Susan did mention when it came to comfort with the uncomfortable is that we might get static in our day job, but there's a time and a place. Sometimes it might be the right time for us to stay comfortable where we're at. And there are other times where our risk levels are a little bit higher and we could take a chance. I'm really thankful Susan talked a lot about women in the workplace and all the work that Susan and her teams have done to bring women and underrepresented minorities into the workplace and into the wonderful world of pre-sales. I think it's a very bold move to publish metrics. It's a scary thing to do, but it is the right thing to do. And even with PreSales Collective, we're putting out the state of diversity because we want to hold ourselves accountable and hold the profession accountable. And that is what it takes to move the needle. In my opinion, if you're not putting things out there publicly and you're not holding yourself accountable and being not responsible for those metrics, what's happening behind closed doors? And really to bring more women and bring more underrepresented minorities into this amazing profession of pre-sales, it starts with building a pipeline and casting a wider net, going and finding people in universities, in high schools, in elementary schools, and letting them know about this amazing profession of pre-sales. We say it all the time. This is the best job no one's ever heard of. We are on a mission to change that. And today's episode is a fundamental way that we can bring more awareness to this profession and show what's achievable in pre-sales and life after pre-sales. So that's my challenge to everybody today, is that I hope you enjoyed today's episode, but go and share this podcast with someone who's not in your immediate circle, or post it on social, or post it on LinkedIn. Let's bring more awareness to this role and to ideals that people like Susan St. have that will move the needle, not only for us individually, but our profession generally. All right, PreSales Collective, thanks for listening to me today. I hope you really enjoyed today's episode, and I'll see you next week.